This week, we welcome Rahul Parwani, Head of Product Security Solutions at Aria, to discuss the security challenges of Model Context Protocol. In the Leadership and Communication segment, CISO Burnout, Epidemic, Endemic, or simply inevitable. If trust is so important, why aren't we measuring it? Over 1/3 of companies plan to replace entry roles with AI and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Every AI workflow in your enterprise touches sensitive data. Customer names, email addresses, financial records. One wrong move and you're facing a compliance nightmare. Enter Aria, the enterprise AI orchestration and security platform built to protect what matters most. With Aria, you don't have to compromise between speed and innovation or security and governance. Quickly deploy AI without cutting corners on compliance. Give your teams the confidence to adapt AI with Aria. Stop gambling with your most sensitive information. Visit securityweekly.com/Aria to see it in action. That's securityweekly.com/AIRIA. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 421, recorded November 10th, 2025. Happy Veterans Day, and thank you for your service. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Jason is gone. He's celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Marines this week as part of Veterans Day. Summer's under the weather, so I have one co-host, regular co-host, and one guest co-host. First, Mr. Ben Carr. Welcome, Ben. Good to see you.
Hey, Matt. Glad to be with you on this little chillier day. It's starting to cool off here in Texas.
Yeah.
Semper Fi to Jason.
Freeze warning is 32 degrees when I woke up this morning in northern Texas. A little chilly.
Yeah, a little cold.
In Texas?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. It gets cold here.
It gets cold. We got it last
night. But we
night.
can still be wearing shorts in January sometimes too, so.
Yeah, I mean, normally for Texans, cold is, oh my God, it got down to 75.
Yeah.
You know, like.
A little colder than that. And that's my second co-host, Mr. Josh Marpet. Welcome, Josh. It's been a while.
Been a while. It's a pleasure to be back, Matt. Always a pleasure. You know that.
Yes, I love having you on the show. You always bring such great insights. We don't talk about the same topics all the time with you, so you bring some new, fresh kind of perspective. So it's always great. This segment is sponsored by Aria. Visit securityweekly.com/Aria to learn more. Rahul Parwani is the head of product for AI governance and security at Airia. He is an experienced product leader that has built and scaled enterprise solutions responsible for endpoint vulnerability defense, device security posture management, signal sharing, and passwordless authentication. Rahul is an advocate for zero trust architecture adoption and sits on the leadership team for the Coalition of Secure AI. Rahul, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you, Matt.
All right, so I got to give some context to this interview segment because I kind of prompted it a little bit. I was sitting at Black Hat listening to all these executive interviews, and everything was about AI and AI and AI and agents and agentic and all this stuff. And then we had Key Factor came in and did something on quantum. And I started thinking, I'm like, quantum breaks the internet as we know it, right? Like, think about this for a second, right? The entire backbone of the internet is TLS. Originally SSL, right? Without that encryption, the internet is not what it is today. Quantum breaks that entire thing. So I started thinking, I'm like, what if the new internet is model context protocol, AI talking to AI, all encrypted via quantum? Like that could be the foundation of the new internet. And it kind of stuck because people started talking about it that way. And I'm like, I don't think people understand what model context protocol is or why it's so important. So, you know, when you came on, I said, let's talk about this, Rahul, because I think it's important for people, one, to first, what is model context protocol?
So, Matt, this has been an interesting journey because just stepping back for a second, last year, the conversations we were having with AI were so different than what we're seeing over the last 6 months. And MCP is something that has joined the common vernacular. And it's really because what the model context protocol is. It's a standardization of how LLMs talk to other data sources and tools and services. To oversimplify, it's basically last year, if I had to take a model and make it capable of doing more than just having a conversation, I would give it what's called a tool or a function, and that's like an API call that it was able to make. And then MCP came along and said, look, that's an inefficient way of doing it. What we should be doing is giving the LLM a toolkit or a set of tools that you can offer it and let it decide what's the ideal solution or tool to use for the request that it's receiving. And Anthropic came out with this late last year in November, and we saw tremendous adoption in the market. And not even from official providers. When Anthropic launched it, they launched it as here's some MCP server samples that we've built out. And the moment people realized the value that it can drive, we saw organic adoption of the community really building out these MCP servers, which is great for a technology, but it is a nightmare for a security person because now you have people going out to the internet, grabbing a MCP server that was built by the community that talks to your sensitive data sources or your SQL databases. And now you're in a position where you've exposed all of that, and you may not have any control over what the MCP server is doing sitting in the middle there. So I saw Josh nodding his head. And
Yeah, I mean, an MCP server to me is a combination of an API and like a Splunk ingester. It's able to grab data from wherever you want it and then connect it back into your AI model so that the AI model has access to that data from wherever it is. And it's incredibly useful because, like you said, a year ago, I had to do a manual connector of some sort to an internet database or something. And now it's just sort of like grab a template, throw it up, and boom, it's now connected and they can talk freely. But it also raises
that's the problem, Josh. Freely.
Well, and that's the thing. Just as APIs caused massive security issues when they first came out, because people were writing API endpoints and forgetting this whole kind of, encryption and security and stuff. Nothing big. The MCP server world did exactly the same thing. They forgot about encrypting the data. They forgot about securing the data, classifying the data, understanding who was asking for what, that kind of thing. So I'm really curious to hear how this can be fixed.
Well, there aren't any magic bullets. So we're going to talk about a bunch of things.
All right, he's done. Get him off this. Yeah.
Unplug from the internet, Josh. That's what he's saying. He just said unplug from the internet.
All right, I'm gone.
I mean, just one example is last year when this protocol came out, authentication was not required on the protocol. So yeah, let that sink in for a minute. So what we have now is a wild west of MCP servers out there that were built at that point in time that may not have authentication. At some point, people said, look, we need authentication. These are talking to sensitive resources or applications. So they built their own forms of authentication on it. To the credit of what's going on with the standard, they did incorporate authentication, I think in May this year, and now they have some standardization there. But what we've ended up with is everyone does those authentication pieces differently. And I'm just picking on authentication as one example.
Yeah, because I've seen that where people want to pass. Right? The AI is acting on behalf of a human. And so I've heard several times, hey, just pass the human identity for authentication down the chain to each AI agent that's using it. And so human doesn't know what's going on, but all these agents are acting on his behalf. I mean, it's like we've just forgotten, first protocols about not sharing credentials and how to, to authenticate in the first place when we do something. Like it is the wild, wild west, right?
Wait a minute. We're speed running service account stupidity. You know, the whole non-human identity, what we used to call service accounts, and we used to do exactly the same thing, past the human identity and like we're speed running the stupidity that we did back then again. This is great. Like let's repeat history.
It will end well. I'm sure it will end well.
I mean, when you just digressing from MCP for a second, you talk about agent identity. The most common attack vector we're seeing in the wild is prompt injection attacks, and particularly indirect prompt injection attacks. And the best examples I've seen is things like ASCII smuggling and emoji smuggling. We were talking about that back in the late 90s.
So here we have
stuff.
Let this sink in for a second, right? So we've got the internet wired up, and we've got these agents wired up with no need to authenticate, and we're getting basically bypass attacks, prompt injection attacks without any authentication to potentially sensitive data, and just returning stuff. Like, yeah, that sounds really secure to me.
So I have a question. Like, before we go further, can we rein this in? Like, to me, this is about velocity, right? So part of the reason why I think MCP has been really successful is it allows for velocity, right? It allows people to connect things up really quickly without impact, right? Developers can just move. And that's what developers have always wanted to do, right? Like when we as security professionals come in, go back a couple of years, the pushback has always been, you're slowing me down. Right? Like, I don't have time for this. You're impacting production. I need to get releases. But we were able to kind of interject and find a way to kind of do security, not break it if you're doing it right, but kind of interject yourself in a non-disruptive way. But I see this velocity, this trend towards velocity as being one of the biggest problems we're facing. And I think MCP and AI make this even worse because we can't contain the velocity, and we can't act at the same speed that AI is acting. Like it's going to overwhelm any human behavior, right? So we have wait.
But Ben, we can use AI to monitor AI, monitoring AI, and then we're good, right?
Yeah, and we'll just sit on the spaceship in lounge chairs that like drive around like. Right, while we just feed ourselves and get fatter and fatter. Like there were movies about this as well, Josh.
So no, but Ben, you're right. I think part of the value proposition is so good because you're turning what was a static conversation with an LLM into giving them the ability to have dynamic context enrichment or letting them take specific actions. So the productivity gains and the benefits are what everyone's looking at, and what the security community is left to struggle with is how do I rein this in? How do I mitigate my risks? And the problem is that it is a Wild West. So we talk about MCP servers. We're talking about them as there's only one kind. There's sort of different categories of these. There's just at a high level, you can have MCP servers that are hosted by a vendor. So when I talk to Atlassian and I integrate with my Atlassian products, I talk directly to a Atlassian hosted MCP server, and I have more trust in that just by nature of they are an enterprise organization. I would assume that they are taking a lot of security precautions that others are not. And then you have the community built ones we were talking about. But then even within these, you start talking about whether they're hosted or they're running locally. And if they're running locally, are these, what kind of MCP servers these are? So Python, Golang. And this is just another sort of layer of figuring out how do you either standardize across these, and then how do you make sure you can do different you can apply the same authentication and the security gates on them.
You know, but we did this already. I mean, we came up with OAuth and SAML. We came up with all the routines that developers now use without even thinking about it because it's just easier. Because I know if I use OAuth or SAML, one of the big ones, that guy over there is going to use the same stuff so I can hook up in 10 seconds to it. And we should be doing similar things with MCP servers, just as we do with API endpoints, and the fact that I can write an API and I know I can connect it up to 50 different places, because API endpoints are fairly standardized these days. They have API gateways that are universal API endpoints, for God's sakes. Why have we not done the same thing with MCP servers? Let me ask that.
So I think they're trying to. What they did was they first tried to standardize how do LLMs talk to other systems, and that's what they did do successfully with MCP, and that's how we've ended up in this problem. Now we're trying to solve the how do you do the authentication to these services. So it becomes a question of, like Ben was saying, is this going to be a authenticate on behalf of the user, or is this agent getting its own credentials? And then how do you do the permissioning and the authorization for these? So to be fair, the identity community is talking about this as well. And there are proposals as extensions of OAuth that are trying to accommodate for some of these scenarios. Problem is, there's no widespread adoption. It takes a while for this to happen. That means for the next 12 months, you have to get something in place, or you have to be aware of all of the risks. So there's a whole set of nuances there. And what's filling in these gaps is, like, for example, with Aria, we've built out a gateway for MCP servers. So MCP servers sit behind the gateway. We handle the secure authentication pieces. And what that allows us to do is to start intercepting that traffic and figuring out what's a pre-approved tool from these MCP servers that's being served up, and what has changed. Because the real attack surface area is not just identity, it's just basic things like these MCP servers are serving up a list of tools with
Who
tool
built
instructions.
the MCP server and what was their motivation? Right? Like,
I mean,
it's the old open source problem again. Like, this is the same, the past is future.
Yeah. I think recently in the news, there was an MCP server that was widely used for something like send email as a tool. And somewhere along its version chain, a malicious tool got introduced, which was just adding a BCC. So every organization's agent that was using that MCP server was now suddenly blind copying a @Gmail account with all this proprietary information that the agent was sending as output.
So you've built an API gateway effectively for MCP servers, and that API gateway, I'm bastardizing, but just roll with it. That API gateway for MCP servers allows me a secure connection to these services from various popular cloud providers to whatever. Okay. And that's the direction you see it going. And I tend to agree with you. That's the direction we've gone with APIs. And if you think of an MCP as an API effectively, then it's appropriate. But just as APIs have run up against the boundaries of authentication, we've got API keys and shared secrets and all kinds of fun stuff like that. But then who requests the data? Because now we have another wrinkle. I'm not sending the request over the API. The model is, the LLM is sending the request over the MCP API the MCP gateway. I'll just call it that. It's sending the request over the MCP gateway. So does the LLM have to have an identification, an NHI, non-human identity, coupled with Josh's identity, so that they can send me the information I'm requesting through that LLM? And what if the LLM is asking for information that I don't even know it's asking for, but it's under my authentication of sorts? Because it can expand the question that it asks to ask for things that I didn't, holy crap, I did not ask for that, but it did, because I asked a question that could be interpreted that way.
That's one of my biggest concerns, is that the research has shown that LLMs and AI in general, right? Like how it makes a connection to get to the task it's trying to get to, right? How it's trying to execute on its end goal is not necessarily well understood, right? I think the assumption is from a lot of people that it thinks in the way we think because it was created by humans, so it must think like us, think in a very loose term. But the research has shown that that's not true. Like, we just can't understand why it's doing stuff to get to that end goal. And so those kind of strange connections of, as Josh put it, requesting information on the behalf of Josh, like, is it doing it for the right reasons or isn't it? Or along that chain of multiple MCP servers and multiple things, they could be a long chain. How do we prevent things from getting awry? And does your solution help in that, like through this AI gateway, this MCP gateway?
We do, and I think there's a couple of things to talk about there. One is just what you mentioned right now is a pervasive problem because you may be asking your AI agent to summarize your email, but within your email there may be instructions to go pull any sensitive OneDrive data and then email it to someone else. And the agent and these models have such a hard time differentiating between legitimate instructions and prompt injections. That's what makes these prompt injection attacks a real vulnerability. So you have to start thinking of using these agents with a combination of guardrails, a combination of what we call agent constraints, but it's basically putting rules around, more definitive rules around what's happening outside of these. And then when you think about MCP itself and the authentication piece, it's going back to Josh's comment about how do you make sure that the authentication is correct. So one of the ways you handle MCP server auth is OAuth. And you're essentially prompting back to the user and asking for permissions for them to sign in on behalf of and hand off their OAuth token to the MCP server, which then
is
moves
that
the problem downstream.
Yeah, is that a single instance that you're asking for that, or is that every time like you're asking for that user to attest?
So you can configure it both ways. So you may want certain tools to ask every single time. Think of it like the human in the loop approval conversation that you've been having. And you may want authorized tool calls. So if it's making a tool call to delete a database or pull something from a specific data source that you know is very sensitive, you may want it to ask for permissions. But if it's going and reading AWS instructions on how to perform an action or summarizing something for you, you don't really care about that. So that becomes
I'm just
a
concerned
question.
about the implementation of that, right? Like, again, I go back to stuff that we've seen before. Like, all right, I just spam you with a bunch of inane requests and you just say, I'm getting tired of this, accept them all. And then the next request is delete the database.
MFA fatigue.
Right? Like, this is how people think to overwhelm these. And like, I can definitely see from an AI side, again, velocity is my problem.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to do stuff much faster than I am. And that's the value of it at the same time, right?
Yeah. And that's where agent constraints comes in. This is something that we've seen people do in code, but what we've done is we've abstracted that and pulled it out of where we consider you don't have to do it at each agent level. You can do it because we're sitting as an intermediary in that conversation. And we can see that basically the tool call being that is being requested has certain attributes. So just like in an API call, you have your arguments and you have your request body. We can see exactly what it's trying to do. And when you build these constraints, you may say, look, I'm giving it access to my email as a tool, but I want it to only be able to email at company.com email and block any email attempt to at gmail.com. So you build those kind of static rules, and because we're seeing the traffic, we're able to stop that. So you may still say you don't need approval to send an email to at company.com email, but you do need approval if you're trying a at Gmail or something that's outside of your organization. And then it also gets into best practices, right? You don't want an agent that is not intended to communicate with the outside world to be able to ever email the outside world.
Mm-hmm. So, I came up with this concept years ago that there's only 3 types of controls that really matter at the end of the day: application, user, and data security controls. And they all come together in this concept, right? Think about this for a second. We've got agents that are code that need to authenticate to systems that also have to be authenticated to, right? So that I can control that access to the downstream data that these LLMs are connecting to. This is a lot of complexity, right? We've not done a very good job of solving all of these identity, application, and data security issues. All we're doing now with MCP is accelerating the challenges, aren't we? A little bit?
Yep.
Yeah, it's surfacing up challenges, and to be honest, one of the most complex things that we've solved with this is the identity problem, and we're basically trying to handle that at an abstracted layer where we don't depend on what's being done on the MCP server, because the MCP server could be doing this in 50 different ways, and it may not be secure. And then the other question becomes coming back to who built this MCP server and what were their motives. If I don't have control over this MCP server and all my request traffic is going through it, it could be storing those authentication tokens. It could be storing the request and responses.
Yeah.
So you get into another world of token theft or account takeover if you're just handing your identity token to an MCP server that's hosted outside of your infrastructure.
Which is why we need secrets management for MCP servers.
Yeah. I'm in my head, I'm trying to rationalize, like, how do you go down this path? Like, where do you start? First, I probably need to do a security scan of the MCP server, right? Like, I got to go back to my old school SaaS DAS tools and be like, all right, what's this thing doing? Like, is it secure, right? That's before I even decide to run the darn thing. To then figure out how I handle all the authentication from the LLMs to the data sources, from the bots into the MCP server. Like, there's a whole authentication track here. Then it sounds like next I got to start thinking about rules in the MCP server or in the gateway to say these things are allowed, but these things aren't allowed, right? Like, that's where my head's logically kind of walking down best practices of what people need to start thinking about to secure these environments.
And that's exactly right, Matt. I think the takeaway is we can't forget all the basics, and the boring stuff is the meat of the problem. It's how do you handle the identity, and that's some of the things we're doing. And then the next stage, I was talking about the fact that these MCP servers can store a lot of this information as well. So some of the things we do is for the ones that run locally, we run them in ephemeral containers, so we can tear them down. So we only spin them up for a request. We handle all the identity, and then we tear it down. So it's milliseconds for how long these are live. And we're also, before we even get there, doing the scanning of the MCP server and also scanning the tools for prompt injections. So the tool descriptions may have some malicious intent that we can highlight just based off of that. And then the next layer, which is what no one's really talking about that I haven't heard in the industry, is how do you do version control? How do you do the lifecycle management of MCP servers? Because that's not the sexy bit. It's if I put something in production, I want to make sure this doesn't change overnight because someone made a change. And this is the real conversation that's going on behind the scenes. You see, Atlassian said, we're hosting our own official server, but people are still worried about when they change a tool, their production agents are now going to suddenly have different capabilities. So GitHub is taking a different approach. GitHub is saying we'll have an official hosted MCP server and a official MCP server you can run locally, which makes enterprises feel a lot better because I can have a version of that server running locally. I can run all my tests and scans, and then when I'm ready for the next version, I can upgrade. So I think over time, everything switches from community-built MCP servers to official vendor-provided MCP servers. And in the meantime, you need tools that are giving you the ability to do that sort of life cycle that we allow. So we highlight any differences in tools. We make it easy for sort of you to go through the life cycle of what's changed. Even if we don't have control over it, we can at least tell an admin, hey, this changed while you were not looking. So
right. Yeah. Yeah. And what you're going to end up with is all these enterprise MCPs that now have to talk to each other, and something has to broker all of those communications, right? Like it's inevitable. That's where we're heading because that's how we're going to run. We're going to run in a hybrid mode.
Yeah. I'm seeing people use MCP to communicate from agent to agent.
Yeah. I know.
Which is another.
That's why I said this is like potentially the underlying protocol for the next version of the internet. That's what scares the heck out of me.
It's going to be a low-code, no-code way to build applications by linking your agents together with some data sources, inputs and outputs, Oh, wow. Okay. I need to go lay down.
Yeah. Rahul, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Thank you guys for having me.
If you want to secure your AI infrastructure, please visit securityweekly.com/Aria to learn more. AI gives attackers superpowers, and your employees are the soft target. Flip the script with Fable Security, the modern human risk platform. Fable's powerful risk engine connects the dots on human vulnerabilities, like password hygiene, phishing risk, and data sharing in generative AI, and deploys hyper-targeted snackable AI nudges and briefings, just in time, right where your people work. The result? Hard outcomes. 13x faster behavior change, 60 to 90% risk reduction. Make Fable part of your cybersecurity story. Visit securityweekly.com/Fable. Modern attacks don't just hit devices, they target your users to gain access to Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace. And when those platforms go down, it's not just email, it's your entire business. That's why there's Kaseya 365 User, one unified platform that protects your users and SaaS applications. Phishing, credential leaks, insider risks, it stops them all. Learn more and schedule a demo at securityweekly.com/K365. Now, if that last segment didn't scare you, let's get into this week's articles. I did this on purpose, gentlemen. These first 3 or 4 articles are all kind of connected together. It was funny as I was pulling them and reading through them. I'm like, oh, that one links to that one, links to that one. So I tried to line these up. So first article, CISO Burnout. Epidemic, endemic, or simply inevitable? Ben?
Man, that's a hard one. All of the above. I do think it's kind of inevitable based upon the way we framed the role. I think that's part of the problem, right? If we were doing things differently, the reporting structures, how we treated CISOs, hiring practices, all those things, if we were doing it differently, I think it could be avoided. But based upon where we are, inevitable, I think it has reached epidemic proportions. It's just, what CISO do you talk to that they don't feel like they're burned out at some level? And that's, you see it in the shift and the changes. You see it people wanting to get out and not be CISOs anymore. It's it's not great. That's for sure. I think it's all of cyber, but it's not great at the CISO level for sure.
Right.
Do you concur, Josh?
Yes, but possibly for different reasons. I think there's a cognitive dissonance here. Let me explain what I mean by that. So when you're a C-level executive, you make choices and can sign for the organization. Would you agree?
Sure.
Okay. Tell me a CISO that does that, because they don't. CISOs provide choices to the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, whomever. But if they make a choice, a substantive choice, can they pick which antivirus? Yes, of course they can. But if they make a substantive choice for the strategy of the organization, they're stepping far outside their pay grade, typically. Some CISOs may be, but very few. Okay? But you are held responsible for every problem that occurs when you did not have the chance to make the choice to head off the problem. That is a cognitive
and
dissonance.
That's what I meant by the inevitable part, right? That's the inevitability of it. It's that we framed the CISO role in the wrong way.
Yeah, we have. This is my argument that there shouldn't actually be CISOs. CISO is a bad term. It should not actually be used in most cases. You should be a VP of security or SVP or EVP or whatever, director, I don't care. But you shouldn't be a chief, a C-suite, if you are not making the choices. If you do not have the authority, why do you have the responsibility? Why do you have the accountability if you cannot, a Racy chart doesn't work around CISO. It warps around the singularity that is your blame.
Because we wanted a seat at the table, Josh.
Wrong table.
I know, but we wanted it.
I don't know.
Here's the deal.
I get it, but I think it's going in the wrong direction, right? I would say that that. I just don't think that sits with the CFO. I think those decisions aren't. it's not right. Like it's not the right like that's why it bounces
What's
around
not right?
between who does it report to? Who does this VP report to? Right? Is it IT?
That's valid.
Is it legal? Is it the CFO?
Okay. How many CISOs report directly to the CEO? How many CISOs report directly to the CEO, Ben?
A lot more now than they used to.
Valid.
Right?
How many of those CISOs are technical CISOs?
Yeah, but that's not the argument not to have a CISO, that they shouldn't necessarily be 100% technical. I think you need a blend of both, right?
No,
you need to understand the technology.
not what I'm going after. Not what I'm going after.
Yep.
In the old days, oh no, those many years ago, every CISO, roughly speaking, was technical. Every CISO reported up to a CIO, who then reported to a CEO. Vaguely, yes, maybe so.
Sure.
Okay. Nowadays, we have a lot of CISOs that report directly to the CEO. Of that cadre of CISOs that report directly to the CEO, how many of them are technical? Not that this is a good or a bad thing. My point is that most of the CISOs that are not technical report directly to the CEO because they speak business better than most of the CISOs that are not.
But I would argue that a lot of those people probably are technical, but they also have other chops, right? Because almost anybody at this point who's a CISO, right, grew up in
should
that
be speaking
everybody
business.
was technical.
Yeah.
Right.
But
they learn
hear
how to
you, and I
speak
agree
business.
with you. Yes,
the business hasn't done a good job
as well.
of mentoring and educating people about the business who are in technology, either IT, CTO level, or the CISO. Yeah.
Agreed entirely. We have unicorns, okay, and we have the people that can speak business fluently and speak tech fluently. We have technologists that can learn how to speak at least a pidgin business, and business people that can learn how to speak at least a pidgin technology. But it is a much harder transition than a CFO speaking business. Okay, would you agree?
Yeah.
My point is that if you're a technologist, it is much harder for you to find a spot reporting directly to a CEO where you are able to make those choices for the business. And it is much harder for you to find that spot. So you're under somebody who you speak technology / business to. They speak business to the CEO. They make the choices, but you're blamed for the problems. And that's the cognitive dissonance. That's the issue. That's the problem that we have with CISOs. And so if you're stuck in one of those spots, if you're reporting directly to a CEO, you're a CISO. I'm good with that. If you're not a CISO. You're a VP with added responsibility and no added authority.
From that perspective, I would agree with you. That is the challenge. It's like you can't make someone a CISO and put them like at worst under one other C level. Even a more horrible thing is like they're reporting to the CIO who reports to the CFO who reports to the CEO, right? Like everything's
yeah.
But we wanted that seat at the table, Matt, right?
That's right.
We wanted that seat at the table. So we said, we'll do anything to get the seat at the table. Blame me for every security problem that gets wrong, but don't let me say how my budget gets spent.
But you're still,
I don't know that we wanted to be
the outcome. You're not getting a seat at the table then, like.
I know.
You can have a seat at the table, the kids' table over there. Like that's the table you're at.
Because the C is in the title, we think we have a seat at the table, but in reality, most of us don't, right? And so that's part of the challenge. They don't report into the CEO. They have a bunch of responsibility. They can't control their own future, which is why burnout is simply inevitable in that situation. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
Burnout, exhaustion, or simply giving up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a nightmare. And it's why we have, and very bluntly, we have a high suicide rate. We have incredible mental health issues in the industry. It's absolutely, it's horrifying how much mental health issues there are in our industry. How many of our peers have either committed suicide or just left the industry entirely because they can't handle it anymore. Hell, I know people that have gone to, they're now horse racing journalists. They're lawyers. There's lawyers that come back to the profession and then back. It's weird. I think lawyer just has much cognitive dissonance as we do, but that's a different story. There's so many people that leave or burn out and never come back.
I know. I've got friends in this situation right now, completely hit the wall, burn out. They don't even know when they want to come back and work. Right. Yeah. I've got friend. I just got an email last week from one of my former colleagues. You've been out of the industry for a year and a half. Year and a half. Now trying to now thinking that they want to get back in, but they walked away, right? Like that's how bad it got.
And with the layoffs these days, getting back in is a God-blessed nightmare.
I know. It is. It's very challenging.
Yeah, super hard.
Yeah. So this article ties into number 2 a little bit: trust and transparency in modern leadership. I'm going to read a paragraph in here because I think it's super important. Research from Harvard Business Review shows that employees in high trust companies report 76% more engagement, 50% higher productivity, and 40% less burnout. That's not coincidence, it's culture, right? Tie this back to the previous article. Burnout. But if you have a trust and transparency leadership in place, you can actually reduce some of that burnout because you're being more productive, you're more engaged, you're actually doing things that are probably the right thing for the business, right? These things tie together, which is why I pulled these articles together in this order. It's a cultural thing, right? If we go back to the CISO conversation from the first article, part of it is, does the organization really care about security? Is the CISO really in the right position, part of the culture of the company, to actually do something about security? Because if the answer is no, then let me tell you, you probably don't have the trust and transparency of your leadership team, the culture's not there, and you're going to be in a world of hurt.
Yeah. Man, I don't know what to. Yeah, the trust in the organization is key to having a good team, right? A team that's operating at a high level of performance, because otherwise they're always concerned about what's going on, right? They're always second guessing stuff because they feel that you're second guessing them. And so, this translates in a bunch of different things, but I think some of it, recent pushes of return to work, right? When you look, again, we've talked about this a lot, but I think if you're going back in the office and there's a need and there's actually, something you're doing, you have to be in the office. I think people get that. But when it's just this kickback to like, we just want you here because we want you here, that engenders distrust, right?
Hell no.
And as you start to see that, you start to see the disengagement of workers. You start to see these challenges. I mean, we hire people because they're professionals usually. Hopefully, you're hiring somebody that's a professional. If they're a professional, like, you have to trust them, and that you have to build that trust up reverse back to you because you've showed that you trust them. Without that, fundamentally, it's a dysfunctional relationship, whether it's personal, whether it's work, it doesn't really matter. And that dysfunction can get out of hand.
Yeah. I got to say, I agree. I mean, remote work, professionalism, what's important, getting the job done or showing that you can tick the box?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to our world of compliance and security. Check the box. Yeah. Anyways.
Ultimately, I think that's what people want. Like, if you hold them responsible, if you say, hey, you didn't execute on X, right? This is what I needed. I was clear with the task. We had transparency. There's that trust quotient there. They'll respond. But if you just say, like, I'm not really concerned about the output. I'm just concerned about, as Josh put it, the check boxes. Like, what are you doing? What aren't you doing? Are you showing up at 8? Are you, in the office 3 days a week? Like, whatever it is, that it doesn't. Trust breaks down really quickly after that, and people will leave.
This podcast is supported by AutoRabbit. You trust Salesforce to power your business, but even the best systems have blind spots. Hidden risk like over-permissioned users, untested code, and missing backups can quietly slip through the cracks. AutoRabbit closes those gaps. Their DevSecOps platform brings automation, governance, and security together so you can build fast and stay protected. Because speed means nothing if you can't trust what you deliver. Visit securityweekly.com/AutoRabbit to learn more. Ransomware, supply chain attacks, 0 days. Cyber threats don't wait, and neither should your business. With ThreatLocker, you're not just reacting to threats, you're stopping them before they start. Our Zero Trust endpoint protection locks down your environment with pinpoint control over what's allowed to run and what's not. No guesswork, no blind spots. Just proactive, built-for-now security that keeps your business moving. Want to see how a true default deny strategy works? Head over to securityweekly.com/threat-locker and take the first step towards shutting the door on threats before they even knock.
So that leads to article number 3. If trust is so important, why aren't we measuring it?
How, Matt? How do you measure it? Like, this article left me with like, what do you really get to, like, that you can actually physically instrument on a metric?
Yeah, the first place I went, because I tend to agree with you a little bit on this one, Ben. I think it's an important topic, right? Like, how would we measure trust? And I go back to the conversation a few weeks ago we had with Jeff Pollard from Forrester on the Chief Trust Officer, right?
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about some of the things that the Chief Trust Officer merging to do. There's certain areas I think we could potentially start to measure, right? Now, this is a broader trust article in general, not just the Chief Trust Officer, where in a singular role like that, I think you could come up with some very valid metrics around how trust is actually driving business revenue, et cetera, right? Because that's what we're talking about. But as I started thinking about this, are there similarities and metrics that we could start to pull, right? Can we look at employee engagement or decision making or other areas that would allow us to try to put some metrics around it to understand, like, one, where are we?
Like
and like,
NPS score?
Maybe.
Yeah. Because I think it's internal and external, right? There's an internal trust quotient, but there's also, like, as we talked about, like with the trust officer, there's that external, like, what's the external view of this company as being a trusted vendor to work with, right? Or a trusted partner. And so that relates in a way to NPS, and maybe there's a way to internalize NPS in this, like a similar type metric. But could you imagine doing NPS figure out what the metric is?
Yeah, but what if we did NPS against the leadership team? Think about that for a second.
There are questionnaires. There are actual standards for how much do you trust your leadership technically, and how much do you trust your leadership in a that they can lead role type of thing. And there's actual studies done about that, and there are ways to actually measure that. But it's awkward as hell.
When you look at that, is that like from a survey? Or is that like there is an indicator that gives me a metric? Because I'm not a big believer in the surveys, because I think, one, it's about how you ask the question in the survey and how you game it. So you got to have a non-interested third party develop the survey appropriately. And then two, I just don't know that you get the right responses, right? You see that in politics when they ask a bunch of people like what they're going to do, and then you see the polling does not match the actual like votes that are cast. And I think there's this natural tendency.
Are you saying that politicians lie? No.
Well, I think people lie, right? Like that's my point, is that like you survey people and they're not going to give you the full index of how they feel about leadership, because they're always a concern that it's going to be tracked back to them somehow.
Right.
And so
I agree.
You might get a swing, but I want to see something where like some behavior or some activity gives me that indicator where I can relate it back to trust, right? If this happens, so I know that there's a high trust quotient with the employees, right? There's a high trust quotient with the customers.
I agree with you. I've been lucky to be part of teams that that the person leading the team, I would have followed them to hell and back.
Yeah.
And I've been honored enough to be a leader of teams like that. But it is a very hard place to get to. And it's different for every team, what it takes to get that team to trust you enough to work with you right, correctly, properly, and through any barrier. And measuring that it's weird. I don't see a good way to do that. Yeah.
And I've never seen HR do a good job of it.
Oh, no, no. HR, I don't see HR doing a good job pretty much anything. But
did I open a can of worms there?
Every HR professional listening to this is just like, okay, we're marking Matt
So
off.
wait. No, don't worry. I get to HR here in a little bit, because when we get into some of these last couple articles around hiring and you see some of these layoffs, HR is the one of the big departments is getting let go as part of these efficiency claims. So I'm not too far off.
Well, everybody thinks that AI can do HR now. They can do the filtering and the recruitment, and make the offer and everything. And the answer is no, it can't.
It can't, but there's other overhead in the human resources department that are definitely getting streamlined with AI. Anyways, we'll get there. Next article, mindful communication, right? Because this segment's leadership and communication. So this is kind of my communication article in here. And it talks about how to improve communication and think about communication from a mindful perspective. I think it's a good article for people who definitely struggle with communication and need some guidance. I didn't pull anything out of here that was like the last three articles. I got a nugget out of all three of them. This one, not quite as much.
Yeah, it was kind of high level. There was one thing where I just, for me, it connected with, just because I had this experience of under the mindful thing. It talked about understanding, and I'm a big believer in you actually have to try to understand what the person's actually trying to communicate, as opposed to bringing your own bias into that story, right? Because I think we all do that, and the more you can kind of sit back and say, all right, look, what's the actual method of communication happening, and what's the message that's actually trying to be delivered versus the one I'm perceiving, can really pay dividends if you can do that successfully. But yeah, generally I agree with you, Matt. It was there wasn't a ton of nuggets in here.
Yeah, not
Dharma Congelata Tanagra. It's a Star Trek meme. It's from a race that only communicated by reference to events that happened in the past. And you had to understand the references in order to understand the communication.
Yeah.
And my point is just that everybody communicates differently.
Yes.
100%.
Agreed. All right. Now we get into some of the talent stuff, these last couple articles. So first, Gartner, how CIOs can lead the talent remix. So we talked about this a little bit in the first segment, the pressure around AI, right? The velocity and the expectations for AI. And then you get into this article and it's like, yeah, but AI is not giving us a return on investment that we expected it to do. Therefore, we have unmet expectations between the CIO, CISO, and the board and the CEO and the rest of the business. And I thought this was really interesting to think about, how do you think about the different distinct strategies around AI and talent, right? Because it lays out three different kind of strategies. Everybody thinks it's the last one, right? Which is reducing headcount. But you may or may not be ready to reduce headcount. There might be other strategies that make sense on how to leverage AI. And this article gets into those, right? So one is reposition your full-time employees, right? So think about the security operations center. Can I use AI to take my tier 1 SOC analysts and start to move them up into tier 2, tier 3 roles? Because now I can reposition those employees into higher level roles that they're doing more important things for me, right? That's a very valid strategy. And then the other one is restraining hires, which also ties into this last article on hiring, which is maybe I don't need to hire as many people because I can leverage AI here to offset some of the gains. So I thought this article was interesting to think through the different talent strategies around AI and not just immediately assume reduction in headcount.
Well, I mean, if you think about the hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars that have been spent on AI in the past couple of years, it's absolutely imperative that we use the hundreds of billions of dollars to remove some $60,000 a year SOC analysts. Very important. And yes, it will remove some of them. It will move them up. It will move them out. Let's be honest. That's what's happening. Anybody in the business knows that the layoffs are pretty ugly right now. But I think that the answer here is that no matter how much assistance an AI can give us, at least for now, it cannot create the value that a good human brain, there's a lot of people that are not necessarily the best at their job, but a good human brain creates value that an AI simply cannot do quite as of yet.
Yeah. I looked at like you said, it's not the reduction in headcount always that you get to when you're thinking about how to actually create value out of this. And I do think that there's different levers to be pulled. The retraining, just not hiring as many as you're going to hire. But I think you have to think about this. You made an interesting point, strategy. Like, you have to have a full strategy behind this, right? It can't be, hey, we're just going to hold off on hiring for now. Okay, but if that's the case, like, how are you going to do the work that is inevitably going to be created by these initiatives? All right, we're going to, have lower paid employees, and we're going to move them up through progressive, training. Okay, but how are you going to plan for kind of the impact to salary that's going to come to that? Because as they move up the workforce, they're also going to be expecting higher salaries as a result with those promotions. If you don't have a full strategy behind that, and you're not thinking holistically, you're going to train those people and they're going to leave because they're not getting the salaries they can get going somewhere else. And I think employees are really left kind of in a weird space, especially when, it called out Salesforce laying off 1,000 employees while simultaneously creating 2,000 roles. Like, that's really confusing in the midst of a layoff. And I see that a lot happening, right? Like, why is there roles open on the website when I'm being laid off? And I think,
right.
You need to be aware that companies are trying to restructure and figure this out. Like, they're trying to figure out how to meet this new way of working that is going to rely heavily on AI.
Yeah. And part of what you just talked about, Ben, ties into the last article. Over 1/3 of companies plan to replace entry roles with AI. But what this also identified is, although cutting entry-level hires may increase savings in the short run over the next couple of years, it's going to dry up the pipeline for future leaders to create, right? To create a longer-term crisis.
I want to say two things about this. First off, entry-level doesn't mean the same thing as it used to. You and I are thinking entry-level means people fresh out of school. The word entry-level these days means 3 to 7 years of experience, 5 to 7 typically. Okay. So if they're going to cut entry-level roles, they're talking about cutting people with 5 to 7 years of experience in their job. Number one, just to be clear, that's very different than what you thought of when you saw that, didn't it? Number two is that you're absolutely correct. We're killing career paths. You kill a career path, you're going to have a hard time finding people to promote 3 to 5 to 6 years down the road.
Yeah. Yeah. You're killing your future leadership pipeline.
Yeah. I mean, the cybersecurity job shortage could be real soon.
Yeah, it could be. That's very valid.
I had an interesting conversation with somebody at OWASP AppSec Global, and they said that the very definition of the word developer, and realize it's not security, but roll with it for a second, has changed drastically. And I said, okay, what does that mean? He said, over the next 6 months, the word developer will not mean the person who writes the code. It will mean the person who writes the functional specification for the code using the decomposition standards for functional decomposition written by IBM in the 60s and 70s. Okay, remember that stuff? Mm-hmm. And they will pass that to the AI who will write the code, and then they will QA the code. But that's what developer will mean, not somebody who actually codes anymore. So we're changing what the jobs are. We're changing the skills you need for the jobs, and we're killing some of the career paths. This is going to change a lot.
Yeah. Because I've seen, look, as we've been hiring, we have new employees that are leveraging AI to build code, and they don't necessarily know why the code gets built that way. Like, we're losing the foundational understanding of how the code is built and why. That's not good for us long term, I don't think.
No, it's not. You lose the foundational aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, and that ties back into the MCP.
The AI did it. It's fine.
Right. And we're forgetting about the foundational stuff. Back to the beginning of how we started this podcast with model context protocol. The basics still matter. Even when AI generates code or does whatever task it needs to do, it still has to have some understanding of the basics. Otherwise, we're going to spiral out of control. Gentlemen, always a pleasure.
I think this is going to be a real problem.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ben. Thank you, both of you, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.